So I am honored and humbled to speak in the hall before the Jefferson Literary and Debating Society. I don't see Mr. Poe in the audience, at least not in corporal form, but I am nonetheless privileged to be welcomed by such a distinguished group. I look forward to an engaging and spirited dialogue. One thing I'll admit to you up front is that though I taught for a decade, and am among the most self-conscious people on the planet, and so these moments are not my finest. I feel there's a lot to live up to at this speaking engagement. So I sought guidance in ways appropriate for the context. I looked to the motto of the hall. In the future, it will be pleasing to remember these things. This suggested to me that at a minimum, I should honor this hall by being an entertaining and engaging, witty and wise, and create a night worthy of remembering. Tall order for a finance guy. Second, I look to those who have gone before me for clues about what the society might be seeking. The wit of Penny Mayne, Ruth Westheimer, and George Will. The wisdom of Edward Teller. The daring of Theodore Roosevelt, the writing of Faulkner, the intrigue of Tom Clancy. At this point, I was beginning to wonder whether the society had really intended to send the invitation to Leonard Sandridge, and it arrived just a few days late. Or perhaps you meant to invite me to join you as a ringer for your annual football game. And if so, you should know that the football that I used to play is of the European kind. Ultimately, I sought guidance from two sources that most inform the structure of what you are about to hear this evening, which leads me to my first humble suggestion for you to consider. When in doubt, and much is at risk, whether in material terms or in terms of the potential for very public humiliation, it is a good time to return to your education in first principles. As an academic, I earned my PhD in the field of public law. I know, what is a guy with a PhD in public law doing running the finances and administration of Mr. Jefferson's great university? More on that later. I earned that PhD at a time when interpreting texts was the source of great debate among literalists, deconstructionists, postmodernists, and other ists, all who had strong ideologies about words. Now, I do not claim to be the sharpest tool in any shed, but fortunately for you, you made the interpretation very straightforward. The Jefferson Literary and Debating Society. This was exactly the kind of choice I liked on my tests as an undergraduate. Two choices and much reduced odds of being wrong. I studied quite a bit of Shakespeare and literature as an undergraduate. I still count among my great passions the appreciation for fine playwriting in the performing arts. I am also among the most self-conscious individuals on the planet, as I said, so the potential to fade into a character behind a good costume and makeup has quite a bit of appeal to me. But given limited time and budget to assemble a worthy band of players, I thought choosing a debate over literature was a more viable option than attempting to live up to the very high standards set by Tom Bloom, Edith West, and the students and others in the drama department here. And so to extend my humble suggestion for your consideration this evening, when in doubt, and much is at risk, whether in material terms or in terms of the potential for very public humiliation, it is a good time to turn to those that know and love you most for help and guidance. I have the good fortune of being married to a skilled, professional communicator. Sharon is with me tonight and serves as Senior Director of Marketing and Communication for the university after being Senior Vice President for Marketing and Strategy for the Delaware State Chamber of Commerce and Executive Director of the statewide Small Business Alliance. So, in the friendly competitive spirit of the society, I have brought my own ringer. Sharon noted that the most important part of communication was knowledge of your audience and options for communicating. I told her that Mr. Mezek had graciously given me the liberty to structure the time as I saw fit. The ornery smile that came across her face is among the reasons I love her so. we began to plot an impromptu debate with an opponent to be selected from the audience. Sensing my hesitation that Machiavellian debating tactics might seem at odds with our culture of honor, she noted that I was merely leveling the playing field given the Society's 187-year head start on preparing for this evening. The clock was ticking. I needed all the help I could get. I know not to look a gift horse in the mouth. I also know that trusting and enabling skilled professionals who do what they do far better than I is the essence of leadership. She advised a stealthy strategy. She noted that with my position comes a very humble role, so that if I chose to stage a debate, my opponent will naturally underestimate me. Fundamentally, my role is both simple and humble: to align the resources, people, time, money, space, in support of our missions of education, research, patient care, and service to students, families, and communities across the Commonwealth, the country, and the world. Said another way, I am here to help others do their job, to maximize our collective capacity to serve and add value. Now, in my role, I do not get the power or the impressive hat of the rector. I do not have the stature or authority invested in the president. I do not have the legitimacy in the leadership of ideas that comes with being the provost or a dean. But, as Sharon reminded me, I do have all the keys to the place. So you will see that there is not another lectern here. Like a good presidential candidate with the power of incumbency, I am exercising my prerogative to speak first and leave whoever my opponent might be on the defensive with limited time to prepare. So one of you is the lucky one. You, or someone near you, will have an iPad or an iPhone, and the good news is that Wikipedia is back up. Somewhere under one of your seats is taped a piece of paper with a secret symbol of my own. Good luck. You will read. I am, of course, kidding. This is an ironically long-winded way of saying I do not intend to speak for the full 60 minutes, but would rather raise some important themes facing us as a community, as an institution, and as a nation, and then seek to respond to your questions so that I might learn from you and address what interests you most. So in thinking about a topic for this evening and being given the great liberty and privilege of illimitable freedom in picking a topic, for which I am most grateful, despite an admittedly limited mind, I decided to seek guidance in deference and respect from Mr. Jefferson. A great student and reader himself, it is no surprise that Mr. Jefferson took education very seriously throughout his life. The first piece of legislation he introduced as a member of the Virginia General Assembly was to provide for the, quote, more general diffusion of knowledge, end quote. Though the legislation never passed, and though the aims of the legislation may now seem at odds with many of our principles, with 3 years of primary schooling for all girls and boys, advanced studies for a select group of boys alone, and state scholarship to, of all places, William and Mary, Mr. Jefferson went on as president to create the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, and as a, quote, hobby of old age, end quote, to create his masterpiece among the many lasting institutions he helped create, the University of Virginia and its academical village. Widely regarded as the nation's first education president, although Al Gore may still be insisting that he invented it, Jefferson felt so strongly about education that he, even as an advocate of limited government and local rule, submitted to Congress an amendment to the Constitution to legalize federal support for education in his State of the Union address on December 2nd, 1806. Though Jefferson's mind and thoughts are often complex, nuanced, evolving, at times even dissociative, Jefferson's strong and lifelong advocacy, whether at the national or local level, embodied a consistency in the underlying purpose of education. On this subject, Mr. Jefferson wrote to Mr. Pierre S. Dupont de Nemours, a family that very much connects with my former home of Delaware and connects it to this region and to Mr. Jefferson. In their correspondence, Mr. Jefferson noted that the purpose of education is, quote, to enlighten the people generally, and tyranny and oppressions of body and mind will vanish like evil spirits at the dawn of day. I believe it, the human condition, susceptible of much improvement, and most of all in matters of government and religion, and that the diffusion of knowledge among the people is to be the instrument by which it is effected, end quote. Perhaps his most famous statement on education comes in a letter from Jefferson in his more humble role as a mere constituent to his then representative Colonel Charles Yancey. Quote, if a nation expects to be ignorant and free, in a state of civilization, it expects what never was and never will be, end quote. This statement is often cited as if it stands alone. The reality is that the context in which it is embedded speaks volumes, as so often Mr. Jefferson does, about debates so current, one wonders whether the human condition is best described as a perpetual Groundhog's Day. In closing his letter, primarily focused on dams and the threat of banks to the well-being of society, Jefferson closes with a plea to his representative for advocacy for the support of public education. Quote, if the legislature would add to that a perpetual tax of a cent a head on the population of the state, it would set a-going at once and forever maintain a system of primary or ward schools and a university where might be taught in its highest degree every branch of science useful in our time and country. And it would rescue us from the tax of Toryism, fanaticism, indifferentism to their own state, which we now send our youth to bring from those of New England. And here is the critical quote. If a nation expects to be free, ignorant and free in a state of civilization, it expects what never was and never will be. And then he says, the functionaries of every government have propensities to command at will the liberty and property of their constituents. There is no safe deposit for these, but with the people themselves. Nor can they be safe with them without information, end quote. Today, the debate about the role of federal and state governments in public education is no less fervent. The questions about whether society is sufficiently informed to ensure the accountability of public officials required in a democracy remains front and center. A cynical mind might look at the current national and state budgets as a planned attempt to divest in education, as a means of reducing the capacity of the electorate to actively engage in self-governance or to hold their elected officials accountable. The reality is much more alarming for those focused on the future of our institution and of our nation. Internationally and domestically, across our country and within the Commonwealth, many forces make it difficult to see or even imagine a time when we will be able to invest or reinvest in our system of higher education. Our world's economy is absorbing a collective deleveraging, accumulated over a generation that will affect at least the next generation. The boomers bring with them an accumulation of potentially unsustainable commitments to retirement income. We live in a democracy and a free economy. That tends to mean that government policy and the flow of funds, both private and public, tend to flow toward the largest numbers or the strongest voices, which for the foreseeable future will be people approaching, at, or past the age of retirement. Good luck to you. So rather than seeing the current national and state budgets as an intentional strategy of disinvestment, we must instead confront a reality that spending on defense or health care is crowding out almost everything else, not just higher education or public education generally. And we must confront further that given the state of our world and demographics of our population, these forces driving disinvestment in education will not change soon or easily. That said, we must also confront the reality that powerful forces are specifically questioning the value of institutions of higher ed generally and of public institutions of higher education more specifically. In assessing the current landscape of thinking about the value, purpose, and future direction of higher education, I turn to whom many have begun to see as the great minds of our modern age, Bill Gates and Steve Jobs. In an oft-cited speech to the National Governors Association, Gates focused the attention of our nation's governors on a very specific purpose and set of metrics for judging public investment in higher education. He said, quote, "In the college area, everybody should have a sense of which of the colleges, both community and four-year institutions, are doing very well. You can even break that down by the departments. It's actually very interesting when you take higher ed and think of it that way. The amount of subsidization that is not well correlated to the areas that actually create jobs in the state, that create income for the state," end quote. For Gates, though his foundation wants to prepare students for, quote, work, life, and citizenship, end quote, he made clear that further public investment might best be judged at the department level by the return on investment to the state measured in jobs and income creation for the state. One need infer, as Mr. Gates went on to suggest, which majors and programs merited such investments. For those of you not in those majors, get ready. Now, many of you are too young to remember the ad slogan, "When E.F. Hutton talks, people listen." But you are smart enough to know that when Mr. Gates and other influential people with greater financial capacity than moderate-sized countries and most states speak, elected officials listen intently. It is thus no surprise that many governors, including our own, have among their highest priorities increasing the number of graduates in science, technology, engineering, and math fields, and increasingly prescriptive funding for higher education in their budget that focuses resources only in those areas. Fortunately for us, Mr. Jobs, as was often the case, had a very different view than Mr. Gates. In this case, he differed on both the role and purpose of education, as well as the outcome measures. Steve Jobs said, quote, "It's in Apple's DNA that technology alone is not enough. It's technology married with liberal arts, married with the humanities, that yields us the results that make our hearts sing," end quote. That said, Mr. Jobs and his company are among the most active players whose activities are seen by some, though not by me or our Chief Information Officer, James Hilton, as the biggest threats from disruptive technology to the fundamental model of delivering and financing higher education. The irony of this discussion is not lost on me. If I, or governors, or anyone else for that matter, turn to two college dropouts for advice on higher education, may seem a little like turning to me for advice on hairstyling. It is true that neither of these accomplished doers and thinkers felt it necessary to finish college to achieve greatness in contribution and wealth. In this case, however, these exceptions are articulating a collective national angst about the value of higher education. The Pew Research Center released a study that found that a majority of Americans believe the U.S. higher education system fails to produce students with good value for their money they and their families spend. And Time magazine listed in the same issue declaring the protester as the person of the year. And for those of you who never got to see the YouTube video of me confronting Occupy Charlottesville, it's a top 10 somewhere. The number 3 of Time magazine's 2011 top 10 consumer spending trends was listed as, quote, questioning the value of higher education. With outstanding student loan debt hitting $1 trillion, more than all U.S. credit card debt combined, we shouldn't be surprised about the rising public sentiment, given the cost of higher education is and has been rising more rapidly than median family incomes, the evaporation of home equity as a source to support, and the shift in the fiscal responsibility for higher education from government to private support. This rising sentiment exists in the face of some very well documented and well-known facts. While the job market for college graduates may be poor, it's much worse for those who didn't attend college. A recent report entitled The Big Payoff demonstrates that in an adult's working life, high school graduates can expect to earn $1.2 million. Those of you who get out of here with a bachelor's degree have hopes of $2.1 million. With a master's, 2.5, and those of you in the audience a doctorate, 3.4, while those with a professional degree do best at 4.4 million. We also know that these investments in higher education have demonstrated reduced costs to taxpayers by reducing the likelihood that individuals will need state assistance, be incarcerated, or otherwise need taxpayer support. To make matters worse, there is similar skepticism about the value of higher education institutions with respect to our other missions of research and patient care. Without going into great detail, equally powerful forces wonder whether the billions in public investment in university-based research have paid sufficient returns on investment, despite the fact that many companies of note, Google, can be traced directly to the basic research done inside universities around this country. Similar questions are asked about the higher cost of patient care provided at academic medical centers like ours, resulting from research to advance clinical care and education to address a growing shortage of physicians and nurses. I am often asked, especially by groups of current students and alumni, like those of you in this hall who are so loyal to our university, how I could have left my alma mater. And given what I have just outlined, one might further question my sanity in walking away from a well-funded private institution of higher education to come to a public university during a sustained period of privatization and disinvestment. Another way to ask that question is, as someone asked me as I walked in this hall, why UVA and why now? Johns Hopkins is indeed an amazing place, with a global presence making a difference in over 150 countries throughout the world. People associated with medicine. Fewer know that it is the leading partner with the USAID in providing public health education around the world from sub-Saharan Africa to Bangladesh to address poverty, infant mortality, malaria, AIDS, and other fundamental problems. Or that it is a leading contributor to our understanding of the universe, leading the NASA efforts with a satellite going around Mercury and another one on its way to Pluto. It is also a place that made many things possible for me in the way that this institution will for you. I would not be speaking to you before you today had I not been the beneficiary, as a first-generation college student, of financial support from a fellowship that allowed me to study with world-class scholars. What is less known and less obvious from my biography is that I have a deep connection to the University of Virginia. I was raised by parents who brought me to Charlottesville and Williamsburg, about every other year of my life. They loved history and ideas, had little money for vacation, and Mr. Jefferson's house and university brought those things together. I remember as a child complaining whenever they talked about going again. My mother took great pride when my daughter turned 6 of the influence these trips had had on my brother and me. My daughter is named Charlotte. My brother's son is named James, names that clearly served as the foundation for this Commonwealth. These same parents taught me 2 very simple principles by which I live. The first is that all people, regardless of race, station in life, age, or otherwise, deserve respect, and that respect is to be continuously earned through one's work rather than one's title or pay. The second is that when one is done taking care of oneself and one's family, one has a responsibility to work to take care of everyone else. It is no surprise that my brother and I have both spent significant portions of our careers in public service. I walked into a university education with little knowledge of the great issues and debates that inform life and walked out prepared. It goes without saying that I had no idea at the time I would become a chief financial officer, given that to this day I have never had a formal accounting or finance course, or really had any idea what I was or would be doing from the outset. What I became occurred as a result of a series of lessons delivered in diverse ways, inside and outside the classroom, from very diverse mentors in very diverse fields that prepared me to advance and add value when opportunities to do so presented themselves. Now, despite the best effort of policymakers and parents to plan institutions and education for young people, life doesn't turn out as you plan. And frankly, I wasn't much of a planner to begin with. As the younger sibling of a very focused, driven, and accomplished older brother, who is now a judge that leads the nation's most prestigious business court and sometimes teaches at our law school. Look out. I was the one who meandered off on what Mr. Jefferson would refer to as well-worn paths. I had no idea what I wanted in a college or from a college education. I was a soccer player who wanted to go to medical school. What happened in between was really inconsequential to me. I entered college on the heels of a surreal high school experience. 2 serious car accidents and continued soccer player had left my brain permanently in a state not far from where some of you might be temporarily tomorrow morning if you live up to the work hard, play hard legends of this great society. 3 games and 3 unconscious moments later, I was no longer a college soccer player and left for home to decide what to do next. I enrolled at the University of Delaware with a major in chemistry with every intention of transferring. In fact, for most of my undergraduate career, I was in fact a STEM student, even with the aforementioned concentration in Shakespeare and English. I did quite well and even enjoyed my studies in organic chemistry. I am a bit of a masochist. I run marathons and things like that. Now, I must confess here, consistent with my duty of honor, that I, throughout my early life, was more than a bit of a rule breaker. Though I was, as a first year, supposed to take my breadth requirements and prerequisites in entry-level classes, I heard from my brother and some high school friends about this professor who was an incredible teacher, funny and engaging, demanding but fair. The man was James R. Soules, who earned his PhD under the tutelage of Marian Irish in the Department of Politics at the University of Virginia. The course was constitutional law. It was a 400-level seminar. This was before the days of computerized registration, where a smart system could prevent an ordinary young man from working the system. So I arrived on the first day, listened as I was told about the expectations of daily briefing a dozen cases with facts, question, holding, and reasoning, and I went home to start reading. I quickly sensed that Mr. Souls did not appreciate my enrolling in his class. Determined to test my mettle and send me packing, he called on me every single day for every single class in front of a group of seniors majoring in the subject. Though he was making his point, I was digging in my heels. The battle was on, and I do not lose easily, and I never give up or give in. This was a J-term course that met every day for 3 hours for 5 straight weeks. By the end of the first week, I was exhausted. By the middle of the second week, we were facing the midterm exams squarely in the eyes. Fortunately, he relented. I had proven myself to Mr. Souls, which was his true intent from the beginning. I later learned that he had admired my courage and willingness to challenge rules in order to learn. He was testing me. At the end of the course, he asked me whether I wanted to be his teaching assistant for the next term. I told him thanks, but I'm a chemistry major. He offered to take $300 off my tuition. I'm a cheap date. And I began grading papers and hosting review sessions. That summer, I was his teaching assistant, and he explained to me what had brought him to the University of Delaware. As we were walking to seminar, he took a detour to walk me up to Main Street. He told me to look down the quad at Memorial Hall. For someone who spent their childhood on the lawn, his point was obvious, that those who had designed the University of Delaware had looked to Mr. Jefferson's academical village. When I came here during the effort to recruit me, Sharon and I walked the grounds. We are both students of art, architecture, and design. She must be much more formally and accomplished than I. We remarked that Mr. Jefferson and his idea of an academical village had an undeniable and lasting impression on the design of higher education in ways so physical and evident. What Jim Souls told me that day was a story about a more nuanced influence of this great university. He said he had come to Delaware with one purpose in mind: to bring to another institution the quality of education and engagement between faculty and students that existed at the University of Virginia. In how he taught, in the ways he interacted outside the classroom with students, in the way he exemplified leadership in his community, Jim was this university's truest citizen. Jim accomplished much in his life. Though he researched much and was a scholar of the first order, he published very little. The measure of his influence is seen in other ways. He counts among his former students a Democratic member of the U.S. Senate Finance Committee and a Republican governor who some think will be president someday. Judges, both federal and state. Leadership in the national nonprofit and for-profit sectors. Women, men, of every race and socioeconomic background. Jim brought us together and moved us forward to higher ground. Jim was a great scholar of Jefferson and a true small d Democrat. Jim's definition of democracy was simple. Whether in standing on any street corner in the United States, you were willing to let the next 10 people you saw make decisions that affected your life and those of your children. He challenged us to answer that question yes, and be willing to do what it took to make sure those 10 people could make good decisions for themselves and for others. Among the things Jim accomplished in his life was playing James Madison alongside the official Mr. Jefferson, who frequently appeared at Monticello. Now don't get me wrong, Jim was not being disloyal to Mr. Jefferson. First, he knew better than anyone that this is Mr. Madison's farm, after all. And second, Jim was only about 5 foot tall on a good day. It was perhaps the only meaningful way he was more Madisonian than Jefferson. Just as my time here had as a child had, Jim left a piece of the University of Virginia deep within me. Ultimately, the same medical issues that ended my soccer career made, despite good grades and test scores, medical education and residency unwise, if not impossible, for me. So much for a STEM student. At a time when I was lost with what to do with my life, I decided that paying it forward by following in the footsteps of my mentor was a high calling indeed. I applied to graduate school and had narrowed the choice to 2 schools, Johns Hopkins and the University of Virginia. The job market, like now, and especially in my field, was terrible. The professor with whom I would study at Hopkins had placed his last 6 students well. I was prepared to decide when Jim Soules called me into his office. He said he had a favor to ask me. A colleague, he said, had asked as a courtesy for me to visit the Department of Politics at the University of Virginia to hear them out. They had offered me a very generous fellowship indeed, and my mentor had never asked anything of me before. It was a typical day in Charlottesville in late March or early April. They took me to the dome room in the rotunda and asked me to imagine defending my dissertation looking down the lawn and out into the world. Among those with whom I spoke while I was here was a then very young Larry Sabato. We're both a lot older now. I came home. With a twinkle in his eye, Jim greeted me at the door, and he said, in his bourbon-like blend that comes with being the son of a Florida sharecropper, Jim had literally picked cotton as a boy, and an educated man from cultured Virginia. Well, Michael, were you seduced? Perhaps this confirms that I am a slow learner, but this time I was seduced. But not by this place's incredible character. Instead, it was by the compelling opportunity before this institution, those who lead it, and the community of people, like all of us in this room, that care about its future and that of our country. At this critical time in our nation's history, where we are questioning the public value of university-based research, the cost of undergraduate degrees, and the outcome of our investments in healthcare, the stakes are in many ways higher in a public institution because the public investment and all else is much more transparent and therefore more highly accountable, which is as it should be. The University of Virginia is not only public, but also public-spirited. The key for us is putting our best foot forward and making it clear our record of serving the public with effective and efficient use of resources. I came here because I saw how well-positioned this place was to be one of the few publics to succeed in the face of intense public skepticism. Johns Hopkins and private universities of the first order will be great. They have substantial assets and support. They have autonomy and strong governance. They do not need to convince policymakers or anyone else, and are not held as accountable for the public investment they do receive. The real question before us is whether this country is going to test Mr. Jefferson's maxim. It seems to me that we are on the path to be one nation, ignorant, and less free, where the capacity of the electorate to be educated and informed citizens capable of holding public institutions and officials accountable for good governance is significantly diminished or threatened. What is at stake is what Jim Soules exemplified about the critical role of a university education in providing opportunity and ensuring the future of democracy. So I answer the question, why UVA, why now? With another question, if not here, where? If the forces facing us prevent the University of Virginia from remaining among and competing with the best private institutions of higher education, we are likely to be dooming public higher education to the fate that has befallen much of public K-12 education. It will accelerate the cycle of disinvestment. The University of Virginia has a 96% retention rate, an 85% four-year graduation rate, and a 93% six-year graduation rate. We have the highest graduation rate for African American students of any state chartered institution in this country. We are among the nation's very best values, measured by Kiplinger's U.S. News, Princeton Review. Kiplinger says, quote, schools like these on the Kiplinger list prove graduates can enter the workforce with a great education and without the overhang of a huge cloud of debt, end quote. Our graduate schools compete at the highest level. The Darden School of Business is fourth in the world as measured by The Economist's 2011 ranking of MBA programs. The UVA Law School ranked nationally by U.S. News and sixth nationally by law firms who recruit and hire. Our undergraduate business program consistently ranks first or second in the nation. It is no coincidence that these schools that I have just named are the ones at this university who have been most able to take advantage of the autonomy in exchange for greater accountability that came with the restructuring legislation that was passed by this Commonwealth several years ago. We have also demonstrated our capacity to partner with the state and other institutions to produce immediate jobs and direct investment in the Commonwealth. The University of Virginia's engineering and McIntyre schools, working with Virginia Tech and Rolls-Royce, are projected to produce 500 jobs and $500 million in investment in this state. We have demonstrated the capacity to innovate and accelerate ideas to market with 26 startups coming from UVA-based research that have garnered a total of $250 million in investments during the last 5 years alone. And in 2011, the University of Virginia's Medical Center managed to care for, get this, 785,970 patients from every corner of this Commonwealth, and I could show you a map, it's every single county, and offered the largest resident training program in the state at a time when the Association of Academic Medical Colleges estimates that by 2020 this country will be short by nearly 100,000 physicians. Our AAA bond rating, the diversity of our revenue sources, the loyalty of our alumni, the strength of our Board of Visitors and President Teresa Sullivan have created a rare opportunity for this institution among other publics and privates if we are thoughtful about aligning our resources with our mission. The unique opportunity for us is to convey our value and prove that the path forward for our country and its people lies with investing, not disinvesting, in higher education and our next generation. Maybe the forces of demographics, the economy, and terrorism will continue to crowd out the capacity to invest in education of our next generation. But as I said earlier, I do not lose easily. I never give up, and I never give in. In the process of being recruited and since, I have been continually impressed by the strategic focus and quality of the dialogue among the President, the Rector, and visitors, and others here on the core issues facing excellent public institutions of higher education. In these conversations, I am struck by the fact that this university did not shy away from asking the biggest questions. The questions are about how to sustainably advance the aspirations of the university and our health system, the faculty and the students, and those others that we serve. How do we build the nation's premier undergraduate experience, even as we meet our commitment to the Commonwealth to grow the number of graduates? How do we prepare graduate and professional students for the changing world by moving beyond the traditional graduate and professional school curriculum to ensure engineering, business, law, policy, and humanities students learn from each other and interact in ways that better ensure their preparedness for their careers ahead? How do we become the Commonwealth's unquestioned leader in advanced patient care and medical education, setting the statewide standard and rising to the top of academic medical centers for quality, safety, access, satisfaction, clinical differentiation, and care? How do we maintain a laser-like focus on quality and create a culture of leadership across faculty and staff around these values? How do we raise our stature as a leader in research, innovation, job creation, and problem solving by transcending organizational and other barriers to address important questions of society and to develop a continuum of economic development and faculty-student engagement capacity in research questions of meaning? The quality of this dialogue and the effort to define the direction of this university is true to the spirit of Mr. Jefferson. When he spoke of his vision for this university, he said that it was to be, quote, useful, end quote, and, quote, useful to others, end quote. As I explained earlier, my role in this effort to demonstrate value is simple and humble, and done in collaboration with a very strong team of professionals that I found here. It is to align the money, people, space, and time to support teaching, research, patient care, and service, to build the capacity of this institution to be more useful and to make it more possible for us to achieve our goals. In order to position the university to its capacity, in order to position the university to do so sustainably, there are several key elements essential to making that possible. In many ways, what we are trying to do here in terms of addressing the balance of the academic mission and the aspects of governance, management, and finance are constitutive moments that require drawing upon the central questions I learned in constitutional law. Those questions are, who decides and how? Are we going to be a confederacy of states or a nation? Or in this case, a confederacy of schools or a university? And how do we balance majority rule with the rights of smaller groups and individuals? We are working to build a new internal financial model that will develop resource capacity. The new internal financial model provides a platform to shift from the present practice that derives from our traditional appropriation-based budgeting system, because we were a state agency, to an effective resourcing process that engages all schools, deans, faculty, and administrators in strategic decisions about our shared priorities and our direction forward. While the exact details of this model are yet to be determined, the new model contemplates all sources and uses of the university and is designed to create greater attribution of revenue to the research, teaching, and clinical practice of the units that generate it. This financial model isn't a revolution. It's simply recognizing a new and better way of working in a new world. Other higher education institutions have been using such models for more than a decade. We're not going to take a model from another institution. We will learn from the experiences of others and develop a model unique to the forward-focused needs of Mr. Jefferson's University. The Board of Visitors supports this work, and the rector has identified this as, quote, a quantum leap forward. The goal of this work is to build a culture of disciplined, reflective alignment of resources with activities. Just as our students, faculty, and staff should expect periodic review and evaluation of their activities, I bet you get your test back. Our academic and operating units should also expect regular reviews and the possibility of resource reallocation, reorganization, or sunset. If we do this right and well, it will not only enhance our capacity to be useful for others, but make the case to those whose support we need that we can be trusted and held accountable to the wisest and be the wisest investment they could possibly make of additional resources. Like any mission-driven organization, we cannot achieve our goals without the help of others. We, like the public and private institutions with which we compete effectively, lose money on research, on teaching, on service, and increasingly on patient care. We make up that difference with public subsidy in the form of tax-deductible contributions, in the form of tax-exempt bond financing for capital projects, and with direct federal and state supports like those aimed at making college education more affordable. All of these, by the way, are under increasing scrutiny, attack, and pressure. It will get harder for us to achieve our goals. Therefore, to be successful, we will need to change who and how we engage through a progressive and vibrant development and strategic engagement approach to potential investors, our harshest critics, the state, the people in Washington, and others that we need to achieve our goals. We will need to identify our distinctive capacity to add value and articulate those areas better to those who do not know us well yet. It will not be enough to speak to our alumni, people who live in Charlottesville, or others that already know us. We will have to be willing to differentiate ourselves from others in the field with candor that demonstrates true self-awareness. It will be important for this great institution to be, as it has been since its foundation, at the forefront of setting the standard for an evolving design of public education and higher education generally. That sea change can present itself as a threat or be seized by us as a tremendous opportunity. With the strength of our faculty and the commitment to and deep experience in creating public value, our traditions of engagement that begin with student self-governance and can transcend to a more open sense of governance in collaboration with donors over great ideas. We are well positioned to be among the most aligned and accountable places to invest when people with resources wish to partner to solve questions and problems that matter to us all. And if we can convey that value proposition, we will go a long way toward ensuring that we become a model of a free people capable of informed self-governance in an accountable democracy. Mr. Jefferson would be proud. I thank you for your kind attention tonight, and I'm happy now to take any questions or entertain a debate with any related subject. Thank you.
Do we have a bit of time for questions? Thank you so much, Dr. This is getting very much into the weeds about your current job. I'm a fourth year, and I've been a student leader now since I got here. And what has frustrated me the most, and this is kind of weird, but has been the room situation at this university. Student groups are treated with disdain when they approach university administrators about acquiring rooms for, let's say, an academic conference or anything like that. Academic and the college or something like, or other groups get access to those rooms ahead of student organizations. I was just wondering, have you been approached about this? And if so, what plans do you have to increase student access to what we're actually paying for, which is the university community?
So the answer is, well, there's lots of questions in there. The direct answer is, have I been approached about this? This is the first time. The more general question is the question of how do we provide service to the people we serve. And fundamentally in that new budget model I'm talking about, one of the cultures that we are working on evolving at this university is the culture of service providers. And understanding who your customer is and who your mission is. If those prioritizations of use of rooms need to be made in a way that balances education, research, student demand, faculty demand, the goal of somebody who is the service provider is that you shouldn't have to question what the priority is, because they should educate you on how they're making decisions, on why it is you rank where you rank in the queue, and be willing to entertain the notion of revisiting those principles. That would be a healthy dialogue. You would not be questioning it at all. You would already know the answer, and you would either find it fair that they had sorted in the way it did, or you would understand the process for raising that question and asking for a rebalance of the competing values of people that serve. Again, as I suggest, that's something we're going to have to develop as a culture. And I'll be happy to get you to email me really specifics and follow up, because that's part of my job. That actually felt a lot like the questions I used to get when I was in people often ask me what the job's like. It is very much like what I didn't know. This is like, in many ways, I'm not the academic side, I'm the everything else side. And it is a lot like running a small town or a big town with lots of constituents who don't know each other very well or collide in things that they don't.
Again, I want to thank you for coming to join us tonight. What do you say to those who argue that state institutions were never supposed to be liberal arts schools to begin with, or who lament that America has fallen behind some other nations in specifically science and technology fields?
So,
I preface, I asked that as a former liberal arts major.
So I think the debates that are embodied in this whole discussion about STEM have existed for a really long time. One of Mr. Jefferson's biggest opponents, Mr. Adams, once said that my generation and yours, and speaking to his son, we take courses in science and accounting so that our future generations can take courses in art, literature, and architecture. I think there's a lot that goes on generationally where people, if you think about what happened over the last generation, we accumulated a lot of wealth. And what you all got out of that was the good fortune of being able to study disciplines that your parents or their forebears probably resented not being able to study because they were much more focused on getting a job. That's a generational issue. There's second of all a generational issue, or a longer-term issue, about what paths lead to value in society. We've gotten very short-term in our focus, right? We're thinking about what income you're going to make. If you take what happens to a liberal arts student and you project out long enough, that income gap closes pretty rapidly. We've been focused very closely on the first 4 or 5 years as opposed to the longer trajectory of that. And it is hard to predict where somebody starts off as a major, is my own personal story, where they will end up and what they will end up doing. 50% of the students who start here in STEM fields don't finish as in STEM field. Now, what's challenging about that is we've structured STEM education in many ways to be about weeding students out from medical school, as opposed to trying to help them get finished and be a scientist or a medical student, right? It hasn't been the goal to get people complete. It's been the goal to sort. That has prevented a conversion rate. We don't know how many people who truly want to be scientists, right? So think of just the demand side. Then think of the supply side. We're going to go through a wave if we're successful about STEM, where we're going to create a whole lot of these people. And the question I would have is, do we need them all? And again, you're going to have a cyclical trend in which that goes on. There is no doubt the fundamental premise of your question, which is if you look at our country, we have the highest degree of college education among people 55 and over of any nation in the country. If you look at our population 25 to 35, we're 10th in the percentage of the population that has college degrees. That's not very good. Our percentage is the same as it was. Other nations are catching up. And so a lot of this is, as you suggest, driven by the fear that our nation is falling behind technologically. And other countries are catching up in terms of the quality of their higher education. I will tell you this, they still come to us when they want to figure out how to do it. And they still send the best and the brightest to our universities to get PhDs. Those people used to stay here. Our biggest challenge is that now many of them go home, where before it used to be reinvestment because we would keep the best and the brightest from other countries. Now they're going there as our jobs. Part of that is a macroeconomic cycle. Jobs are cheaper overseas. They have less environmental regulation. They have less cost because they educate fewer people in the public education system. They provide less in retirement benefits and health care. If I were running a company, it'd be really tempting to send a lot of jobs overseas because the cost of producing what I do, regardless of whether it's science or any product, is cheaper over there than it is here because the playing field across the world isn't as level. So I think trying to regulate, I think the major point I was making in this speech is the government's attempt to regulate what major you major in isn't likely to produce a viable plan of where they end up. I doubt that their level of engineering of that can be as precise as their rhetoric thoughts.
So thank you so much for speaking to this evening. The University of Virginia is the best endowed public research institution in the country. What can other universities that are financially struggling do in the meantime until the national dialogue changes to provide them with enough public funding to stay small?
That's an excellent question. Part of it is that they need to be very self-reflective about what they do that's distinctive. It is about returning to one's core and being true to one's mission. Part of the challenge that we've had over the last decade is that many universities and many, frankly, at the encouragement of public officials, got into the research business because it produced jobs in states. And so we've taken what used to be a very narrow pool of research universities. It used to be you could name the private research universities and you could identify the public ones. Now name a public university that isn't trying to be in the research business. That's not a very effective and efficient way to do it because research space, as any of you in the science field knows, really, really expensive. And so part of it is us beginning to think more collectively about what is the distinctive mission of each institution and how do we stay focused on that instead of trying to compete with each other and be all things to all people. That said, we don't have a good answer to how to finance higher education. As I said to you, we don't cover the cost of an undergraduate education. You know, we do for out-of-state students, in-state students, all the others, but fundamentally the underlying thing, tuition doesn't cover the cost. Research from federal government sources doesn't cover the cost of that research. Clinical care, it's Medicaid, Medicare, doesn't cover cost. We have to make it up by asking people who have money to provide money to support it. In some ways what that is we're having to reclaim tax dollars, right? I mean, one way to be thinking, you know, this raises a whole philosophical thing. Is it better to provide charitable deductions that go directly to a higher ed institution with a restricted gift? Or what if that dollar was taxed and it went to the government and then it came to us directly, right? That's the debate Senator Grassley, ironically, the Republican, was having a harder about the oversized endowment. He's looking at that and saying, our tax policy made it possible. Hold on a second, what are you doing with that money? Because we've got a huge deficit. Have we let that run too far? That's the macroeconomic debate, and we have to figure out a financial strategy prior to solving.
What is the negotiating situation like of public schools of higher education in Virginia versus the state on hot-button issues, say enrollment growth? An example might be William & Mary, which is sort of a unique public school in a smaller size of the state. What sort of control do they have over enrollment growth, and if they're inclined to stay small or if they do wish to get big?
So I'll just give you the example of our institution in Virginia Tech and William & Mary. Folks in Northern Virginia, particularly members of the General Assembly, came to those universities and said, we want to change the legislation and restrict the number of out-of-state students you can take. To go from 70-30 to 75-25. That would have applied to all of us. That not only has significant consequences for the mission, in the sense that all of you benefit from the diversity of ideas and thought that comes with having a first class. Right? It's one of the things that I think makes us a public state institution, but a national class. It also has significant revenue complications for each of those institutions, right? Because in-state tuition, out-of-state tuition. But so we went back to the state with William & Mary and Virginia Tech and said, don't do that, we'll grow. And if we grow and keep the 70-30, we'll actually provide more seats for in-state students than we would if we changed the mix to 75-25. Now note, we traded growth and diversity for less diversity, smaller student body. There's a trade-off there, and it's, right? Your more fundamental question is, how do we relate to the state? Embodied in my comments are the notion that we need to be a public regarding institution. We need to recognize that in exchange for the autonomy that we've been given, that the people who get elected in this Commonwealth have constituents they serve. And when too many of those families can't get their students into the University of Virginia, or like your question, they don't understand why, then we're going to have demands for us to grow so that more students get in. Or we're going to have pressure to take away seats from out-of-state students, right? And so what we need to do is a better job articulating our value, of communicating, and of demonstrating that in everything we do, whether it is pricing tuition, the research we do, how many students we admit and why we admit them, that we're doing it in a way that recognizes and is consistent with the nature of our public institution. They've invested, they meaning the Commonwealth, over a long period of time in this institution. They are equity holders in the same way of a holder of a private equity fund. And we have to recognize that they're one of our investors, and we need to be responsible to them and to the others who support what we do. And so if we don't, they'll regulate us. If we do, then we can be trusted and be held accountable in the ways that some of our schools are now.
Vice President, first of all, I'm really grateful that I get the opportunity to study in this real institution, not with superficial, prestigious reputation, but the real core scholarship and appreciation toward academia. As an international student, I recently found such a question really hard to respond, which is, what do you plan after you graduate from the university? Are you going back to China or are you staying? Actually, one of the gentlemen over here just asked me the question during the interview today. And I find it really hard to answer, because if I say I'm going to stay, he will respond as, oh, you're going to steal our job. If I say I'm going back, he will be like, oh, you are stealing the knowledge you learned from here and to build your own country. So it's a lot of pressure. So, as an international student, I just want to know what's facing the increasing tuition year by year for out of state. I just want to know what's the attitude or opinion the university has toward international students. Also, do you have any expectations?
Expectations of?
Of the future after graduation, I guess.
So your question and frankly the pressure you're feeling is the answer to the question that was asked earlier. One of the fundamental shifts that has happened is that didn't used to be a pressure, or at least not as much of a pressure. Our economy was strong, the number of jobs were growing. When I was in graduate school, we had many students who came from China. They stayed afterwards, and it wasn't a question, are you stealing my job? Now it is, because the economy is constricted. Now it is because other countries are better able to compete with us. I think it's pretty sad that our country is afraid of competition around the globe. I think competition makes us stronger. That we educate people and send them back abroad, that would be a good thing for our foreign policy. It'd be a good thing for our economy. It would raise the standard of living across the globe. Why should we fear that? Why also should we fear if you stay? If we're not as good as you are, and you take my job, that's the way it works. That's the way it's supposed to work. It should be about quality. We aren't in that anymore because people are feeling the pressure of that. Where is it going to head? That's the challenge that was asked in the earlier question. Given that we have a good financing solution for higher education, and given that the state appropriation and the feds are threatening to cut the Pell program, where we turn? Tuition. It's a moment of privatization. What used to be supported as a general benefit for all, you're now going to have to come up with the money yourself. Where that ultimately will result is that students will either choose to go to institutions that are more affordable, so they may have to select down, or some will have to select out, and they'll find other means of education. And guess what? Steve Jobs, and rest his soul, his organization's ready to meet some of that education need. So are some pretty unscrupulous for-profit universities that are great at credentialing. Some of them are very good, some of them not so good. But it's a moment in which that market can be seized because it's really expensive to get the education that you're going to get. And so that is a challenge because we could end up, as I've suggested, with a nation that is less educated or has less access to that. And that has implications for our society to compete as you choose, if you chose to go home and we're in that trajectory. I do then worry about our capacity to compete with China or any other country because they're investing in education and we're not. They have ways to go to catch up, but they've got a lot of resources and willingness to do it.
Thank you again for speaking with us. The concept of science played a pretty central role in your speech to us tonight, especially in your citation of Jefferson, this being the purpose of the university for the state of Virginia. But when you give a quick glance to the rankings of a lot of these departments, our true strengths as paradigms of excellence nationally are our pre-professional and liberal arts schools. What can this university do to strengthen its science departments so that we can fulfill not only the quantity of science STEM graduates, but also the quality that one expects from this institution?
So, all these are great questions. So you're right, the university, one of the things that makes our university distinctive, I talked about having to articulate our distinctiveness. Among the things that make us the most distinctive are our strengths in humanities. And among those areas most under attack, both inside the Commonwealth and across the country. So the first thing you got to do is you got to build on your strength, and you can't abandon it. And you have to defend why humanities actually does add value, and you can think about the ways that it does, and really need to go further. In terms of building on the strength, the big challenge in the sciences is it's really expensive to grow that. And we're growing it into the headwinds in which the federal budget for NIH and other research. What it tends to mean is that we have to look for non-federal sponsorship. We're going to have to look for ideas that, that we can find people to be co-investors with. We're going to have a generation of faculty that retire. If you look, about 50% of our faculty, and this is true across the university, were hired in that age that was, around 1970. We are going to have to be very focused about who we hire, and it's not going to be about the new dollar. It's going to be about the repurposing of that dollar that's spent on our faculty member as they retire. That's going to be the biggest way we can level ourselves up and compete. Now, doing that with the faculty salary on the science hire isn't enough, because as you know from your question, you sound like a scientist. The person who is doing in that lab, in that generation, doesn't need the same tools and equipment of the person we're going to hire tomorrow. And to make matters worse, really good scientists are like really good basketball players. There's more demand than supply. And the people who are going to pay them big money are paying big money. And I just came from the coast. So you're talking $1 million a faculty. By the time you start up their lab, okay? Now that's not their salary. They don't get to take that home. That's what it takes to put the equipment in their lab, to do the research, and the payback on that, if it's federal sponsored research, it comes back. And it comes back over a long period of time. Think of what the lift-off of that is, back to your question. If every single school goes down that road of trying to produce that science faculty that's a research faculty, as opposed to a science faculty that's a teaching faculty, or even getting into too many people teaching sciences, that's a really expensive way to deliver what we need as a country. So that's a short way of saying we've got to be very focused on capturing each opportunity of a faculty hire. We've got to find creative ways to demonstrate to donors who will support research that these are the areas where we will be distinctively excellent. Don't give to Harvard, don't give to Hopkins right here. And we need to be very focused in when we do research, disciplined about making sure that the investments we make pay returns on investment. And I don't mean returns in terms of dollars. I mean returns in terms of value of research, rising and ranking students better educated, or being willing to turn that investment off if it doesn't meet the standards of quality that we expect. And that's been a hard thing in academics. We do not weed our garden well. We invest in things and we let them grow. We're going to have to change that if we're going to be effective and efficient.
I'm just trying to thank you very much once again for coming to present tonight. I was just wondering if you felt that there was an inflated focus on academic reputation in high schoolers choosing one universities in our nation. That is a big problem in our country.
So reputation of higher ed institutions is a really difficult thing to measure. There's a great study, my peer at Stanford University, which has money that makes it possible to study these things, did a 30-year, I have a certain envy, did a 30-year study of the relationship between resources and reputation of universities. And what they found was fascinating. There is none. And as resources grew, reputation didn't change. And the reason for that is pretty straightforward if you think about it. We can do whatever we want in fundraising. We're never catching Harvards in that. They got a head start. The laws of compounding are a little like, Malthusian population studies, right? You're trying to find the curve. It ain't going to happen. So you can't catch up in the kind of resource gaps that would make a difference. The other problem with reputational rankings is that chasing them in many ways becomes a bit of a fool's game, right? So they keep trying to change and U.S. News and World Report figured it out. They make a whole lot of money on these rankings. You all buy it, right? I bet every one of you, when you're subscribed to bought the magazine or one of your parents, you bought it from a friend, it's not right there, so you're part of the problem. But the other thing is in those rankings, that we do analysis all the time. Because it matters. It affects the students we can get. It affects the faculty we can get. But guess what? The biggest variable that affects us is resources. It's one of the variables they score you on. We don't have as much. If you adjust for that factor, we rise significantly. And so, what I can say to you is they matter. They are a measure. We ought to take them into account, but they shouldn't be the measure. The measure should be our own definition of what it means to be a quality program. And if we want to speak past those rankings, then we need, as I've said, in Richmond and in elsewhere, to students and families, to be articulate in a way that you know the value without having to read U.S. News and World Report, or you know that our ranking might be different, or can interpret those in ways that help you understand what we really do well. So it's our own fault if we don't.
Thank you again for coming to speak this time. My question sort of links these two together. What are we doing and how should we approach hiring as this generation of professors retires? And while it's important that we keep our reputation with professors that are doing interesting and exciting research, they also need to be giving us the most bang for our bucks. What should we expect from our human resources as we hire in the next few years?
That's a great question. So among the things we're doing in the new internal financial model is the conversation over budgets, which is really not a conversation just over money. It's among the things I talk about, people, time, money, space, is we're asking of every dean and anybody who runs a service center to tell us what is the definition of quality in pursuit of your mission. Okay? So deans will be accountable for four basic things. What is the quality, what is your definition of quality for your school? What's a budget and sustainable resource plan to get there? How do you measure quality and progress against that, the goals you achieve in funding? And what are the risks associated with pursuing that path? And are you being a citizen not only of your school, but of the university as a whole? You could also translate that, are you willing to be a citizen who serves not only research, but students and teaching? And so in that, we will be expecting of deans in consultation with the provost, and the provost and I run the budget process together, that the faculty, the deans present a faculty hiring plan, that they articulate their strategic direction for the school and how their plans for hiring support that. And we'll be asking the question, how are you balancing the research that you want to do with the teaching you want to do, and how are you measuring student progress on it in the educational sphere? It could be through involvement in research opportunities. It could be in global experiences and other experiences outside the classroom. They could decide that that's the mechanism by which we're going to deliver education. But we're going to have them articulate that. And the process is like it is in this room. You got to be willing to stand up and defend yourself. And then you've got to be able to stand up in front of you as the people who are both consumers and those we serve, and be able to defend as well. And that should be an ongoing annual process, so that we don't have to do some big, bold strategic plan because we do it every year, and we articulate it on a regular basis.
Thank you very much for coming once again. It was a delight tonight.
It, in fact, is my pleasure. I'm always glad to do this, and especially great to do this self-consciousness. And I appreciate the opportunity to engage with you. And as I go across the grounds, I hope you will stop me, ask me questions, and I hope you will find opportunities to engage. I said to you in the middle of my speech something very simple, which is my job is to help you do yours. I take that seriously, and so your questions or the others, if there are ways we can be doing better, or we can better serve, find me. You know where I am. I'm in the back of Madison Hall. I'm in Strine, Virginia, and I work for you.
We also ask our guests to sign our roll book for our record keeping.
Oh, well, I'm first for the year. First for the season.
Provide a recess?
Second.